Hi, and welcome to the Dialogues for the Vaccine Hesitant and Those Who Love Them. I'm Sherry J. Yoon, Artistic Director of Boca de Lupo. Boca de Lupo is a company that has been focused on creating new work, touring productions, and presenting shows across the country and internationally for almost 25 years. We've done tiny shows inside shipping containers and between phone booths. We've done huge productions under Vancouver's iconic bridges and in the rainforest trails of Stanley Park. We also do plays in theaters, but since the pandemic, we've been focusing on ways to keep the spark of theater alive as all the world's venues went dark. This led us to create Plays to Perform at Home, a series of plays delivered right to your doorstep, to be performed with and for the close friends and family that make up your bubble. Inspired by that project, we came together with the Dr. Peters Center to create these dialogues for the vaccine hesitant and those who love them. As a theater company, we conceived of these audio plays or practice conversations for difficult situations as a way of helping people navigate tricky territory with compassion and empathy. The play you're about to hear is called The Case of You by Yvette Nolan. It was recorded at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre, directed by Melissa Langdon, featuring Stephanie Tsai as Kelsey and Hera Nalam as Jo. Kelsey is a fully vaccinated mother of 2 kids, both too young to be vaccinated, sister to Jo. Jo is vax-resistant, but not sure why, sister to Kelsey. The setting, a bench, a picnic table somewhere outdoors on a lovely fall afternoon.
Don't be mad.
I'm not mad. I'm hurt.
I'm sorry.
I just can't believe you won't hug me. Are you sure this is far enough apart?
I'm not hugging anyone right now. Not even if they've been vaccinated. Besides, I'm mad at you.
Mad at me?
Kara told me that you told her not to get vaccinated.
I told her she needed to think long and hard before she did.
Jo, we've worked really hard to have the kids not be scared of vaccination, so that when they were able to get the jab, it would be an easy choice.
It shouldn't be an easy choice.
She's my daughter.
She's my niece.
And I want her to be safe.
I want her to be safe. Just because you put that crap into your body...
It's not crap, Jo. It's medicine.
No one is putting God knows what into me.
God knows. The doctors know. Science knows.
Kelsey, no one knows what the side effects of all these vaccines are going to be.
They have done trials.
They rushed them through. What kind of trials could happen in a few months?
Well, Jo, the whole scientific community put their pointy little heads together around this one issue. It's kind of hopeful, really, to see what can happen if everyone just focuses on one problem.
They called it Operation Warp Speed.
In the States, Jo. We are not the States.
You just wait.
Wait for what?
A year or 2 down the line, when you start to have weird things happening.
Oh, what kind of weird things?
I don't know. That's the thing with side effects. They're unpredictable.
Jo, the vaccines have been tested. They've been approved by Health Canada.
I'll wait.
For what?
To see what kind of long-term side effects there are.
Jo, I can be your lab rat. Look at me. I got my first vaccine in April. I got my second one in June. It's October. I am fine. I had a sore arm with the first jab. I had a crappy 5 hours with the second one. But since then, I have been fine.
It could still kill you.
Jo, a vaccine that has helped millions will kill you, but a virus that has killed millions won't? Have you not been watching the news? Seen all the people who are now in intensive care with COVID saying they regret not having the vaccine when they could. People saying goodbye to their people before they are intubated, telling them they're sorry, they should have got...
Fake news.
Fake news? That little kid, 5 years old, whose unvaccinated mom brought it home to him, now he's in the ICU. Not his fault. He looked pretty real to me.
I'll wait.
What is this actually about?
What do you mean?
You've had vaccines. We've all had vaccines as kids. You got them in school. Polio, measles, smallpox.
That was different.
How was
I don't
that
know.
different?
It was just smallpox could kill you.
Jo, COVID can kill you.
I can manage this.
Manage COVID?
I eat well.
You eat well?
I eat well. I take vitamins. I exercise. My immune system can take care of me.
Jo, that's just not realistic. You catch colds. We all catch colds.
I haven't had a cold in over a year.
Because we've been masked. And washing our hands for 40 seconds, 20 times a day. Jolene, 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 Jolene. I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. Jolene, 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 Jolene. Please don't take him just because you can.
Oh, that's a good one. Better than happy birthday.
Jolene, 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 Jolene.
All right, Dolly.
That was only 20 seconds. You gotta sing it twice to achieve true cleanliness.
Is that why I haven't had a cold?
We were locked in for a year.
Still.
And hasn't it been great? Being able to start living a little more normally? Being outside? Being able to go a few more places? Do a few more things?
And now they want to take that away.
What do you mean?
Freaking vaccine passports. I suppose you have one? Now they can track you.
Yeah, well, they could always do that. Now it's just more overt, I guess.
What do you mean?
Come on, Jo. I had to laugh when I heard about people who were asking for the vaccine not in their arms, but just the syringe, so they could break it down and find the microchip that was supposedly being injected into them to track them. How did that person know that? She read about it on her phone. Has she never watched a police procedural on TV? No one needs to tag us. We have all tagged ourselves. With these, with our laptops and our socials and our debit cards. You didn't think?
No. Of course not.
Of course not. So what then? Why so hesitant?
I don't know. There's just been so much information and it's always changing.
I know. But that's good in a way, isn't it? That no one is pretending they have the definitive answers. That as more information comes in, we get it. I would way rather the transparency. It helps me make decisions. For myself. For my kids.
That's what I'm doing too, Kelsey. I'm making decisions for myself.
Yes, I see that, but in a way, you're also making decisions for other people.
No. My body, my choice.
Yes, and you choosing to not be vaccinated means other people around you are at risk. My kids, who are too young to be vaccinated. But Kara, she is going to be eligible soon. And I want her to be able to make her own choices too, free of talk about microchips and imaginary side effects.
She should know.
And what if you got sick, Jo? God forbid. I don't wish that on anyone. But if you got sick and had to go to the hospital, what happens to the person who is having a heart attack? To the guy in the car crash? To the kid who accidentally ate peanuts and is in anaphylaxis? What if there's no room for them at the inn? Because all the beds are full of people who did not get the vaccine and got the virus.
I don't believe the media.
You don't have to believe the media, Jo. You can do your own research, not just Twitter and Facebook research. There's all kinds of information out there. And you have a doctor, right?
I have a doctor.
Have you talked to them?
No.
They'd be happy to talk to you.
I'm sure my doctor has better things to do right now.
I'm sure they do too. Doctors are stretched pretty thin right now, as are nurses. Look, I can send you things to read, to watch.
Will you watch them with me?
Well, yeah, I can. But you have to agree to stop.
Stop.
Stop telling people things that are just not true.
Kara.
And others. Anyone.
Just until we watch these things.
Until after we have watched these things.
Okay.
Okay. But we better get a move on, because the weather is not going to be this good forever. And then we are going to want to be inside. And I can't be inside with people who aren't vaccinated.
And you are not hugging people, even if they are vaccinated.
That's right. I'm hug hesitant.
Funny.
I gotta protect the people in my life. The little people who can't be vaccinated yet. The older people for whom the jab doesn't work as well.
And what about me?
And you too, Jo. Especially you. Because you are more vulnerable right now. And I don't want to risk your health.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll think about it.
Jo,
What?
air hug? Come on. You know you want to.
Are you sure this is far enough apart?
Jo.
Air hug.
Dialogues for the Vaccine Hesitant and Those Who Love Them was produced by Jay Dodge, directed by Sherry J. Yoon, sound designed and engineered by Carey Dodge, and with communications by Carmela Sison. Special thanks to Kelly Thornton and Camilla Holland at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre, and to Scott Elliott and the Dr. Peter Centre for supporting this project and for all the incredible work they do. This has been a Boca de Lupo project. If you love the play and want to read it yourself or with others, you can go to bocadelupo.com, BOCADELLUPO.com, and download the ebooks for all the plays in this series. You'll now hear a Zoom interview hosted by Boca de Lupo artistic producer Jay Dodge with the playwright Yvette Nolan and Clem Fong from the Dr. Peter Centre.
I'm sitting here with Yvette herself, as well as Clem Fong from the Dr. Peter Centre. Welcome.
Hi, Jay.
Everyone.
Now, I've known Yvette for a long time. I've only recently met Clem, but I'm very familiar with the work of the Dr. Peter Centre. But I am aware that some folks listening to this may not know them as well as I do. So I just want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Clem and Yvette. So Clem comes to us from the Dr. Peter Centre, and he's a registered clinical counselor and knowledge translator at the Centre. Clem has a combined 15 years of experience in housing support, outreach in the downtown East Side community, and compassionate care for people living with HIV. He is a contributor to the Urgent Public Health Needs Site Community of Practice and a co-facilitator of harm reduction and trauma-informed care trainings. A passionate harm reduction advocate, which is something I think we're going to be talking a little bit about today, and a social justice activist. So coming from the more theatery side of the conversation is a good friend, Yvette Nolan, who was born in Saskatchewan to an Algonquin mother and an Irish immigrant father. And Yvette is an very accomplished playwright, director, and actor. And, rather than list the impressive list of accomplishments that you could easily find if you just Google Yvette, I'd like to share a little excerpt from the pandemic bio that Yvette wrote for us for the Place to Perform at Home. Yvette wrote, "Who knew the apocalypse would be so busy? During the pandemic, I have written a couple of audio plays, a play for film called Catharsis, revised The Unplugging for what Alex Ulmer calls The Mind's Ear, which I suppose we're kind of living in now, started a libretto called Namwayut, We Are All One, continued another called Sophia, but the real world, and I like this part, the chomping at the bit for change world keeps pulling me back in. And so I spend a good portion of my day talking and plotting and dreaming and writing about how we might come back from this suspension of our regular scheduled programming as a more just, more fair, more equitable society. I just think that's a beautiful way of putting it. Well, it gives me goosebumps just reading it. So that's who we're talking to. You can't see them, but they both look fabulous today here on Zoom. Yvette, maybe I can go over to you first and just tell us a little bit about what the process and experience of writing a dialogue like this, these dialogues for the vaccine hesitant and those who love them, as we're calling them.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jay, and thanks for the great introduction. As you know, every time Boca calls and says, "Hey, we have this idea," I'm like, "I'm in." I'm always in because I love the work and the way you guys are in the world. But when Sherry called me this time and she said one of the first things is, "Okay, we're partnering with the Dr. Peter Center," and I was like, "Okay, I'm in." I'm in. I was around for the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And so I knew Dr. Peter Center early and was interested to see how it has evolved over the years. And then when we were talking about harm reduction, and of course, being in this pandemic, this go around, and it's amazing to me how many parallels there are, like people who have COVID right now who are like denying it. It's like, no, it's pneumonia, which is kind of the same thing that happened during the AIDS epidemic. Was people were ashamed of having a disease, and we're living with that now. And that, I think, is also gets in the way of the truth that we need to know about this virus. Plus, some of the people in my life that I admire tremendously, some of the people that I love, are not vaccinated. And it's like, I don't know why that is. And as a theater maker, I have always used theater as a way of trying to work things out, making chaos into order. And so this question about dialogues for the vaccine hesitant is easy to do, because it's like, these are the questions I want to ask the people in my life who will not get vaccinated. They're not even sure why they won't do it. They're putting so many of us at risk.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that was like a big draw for myself as well. I think it's remarkable, and I guess this is true of the pandemic, that it seems hard to draw like a social demographic line as to who may or may not sit on what side of this question. And so I think it affects all of us, no matter where we are, who we are, where we're living, or who the people are around us. And so, I mean, I think that's a great segue to ask you a question about Clem. I mean, as Yvette says, the Dr. Peter Center has kind of been at the forefront of this notion of harm reduction, quote unquote, before it was cool, before anybody really knew the term, which I think we, associate with specific things like safe injection sites now. It's a bigger concept than that, isn't it? It's not just about, people who have, addiction issues and having places to safely, consume their drugs. It's a larger concept. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when we think of harm reduction at the Dr. Peter Center, I think we think of it in a very, very broad sense. Like you said, it gets pigeonholed into safer drug consumption, which of course is absolutely critical, especially with opioid poisonings and whatnot. But at Dr. Peter Center, it is very holistic in the way we look at it. So we see food as harm reduction. We see human connection as harm reduction. Compassion is harm reduction. Culture is also harm reduction. And all these pieces are embedded in our service delivery. And so when it comes to the pandemic and sort of misinformation, those pieces, we sort of take that same approach. We actually want to see this done through, or addressed through, a relational approach and sort of understanding and validating people's ideas and concerns. Like Yvette said, a lot of the parallels of this pandemic we're seeing when we started trying to cope and deal with what was going on with the pandemic. We didn't want to close our doors, and we never did, but we had to adapt to public health measures. So it was traumatic for a lot of folks to kind of go back to don't touch, wear masks, clean, because that was very triggering for a lot of our folks, especially our what we call long-term survivors who've had HIV since sort of the early days. And so we actually had to do a lot of work and safety making and trauma-based work around making everything feel like they had some choice and some control over what was happening in the center and what was happening to themselves.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before this. I'm thinking about this a lot, so that's saying something. But the idea, the parallels to HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s, which I worked in somewhat myself as well, and particularly what you brought up there, the shame or the embarrassment, or to the point of trying to call it something other than it is. I mean, that's really fascinating. And I'm curious. I had an experience not too long ago, and it's been this. There's the vaccine hesitancy, of course, and there's also been a real cultural kind of upheaval that's also been happening during the time of the pandemic and increases in racism and those kinds of things. And so I would like this is sort of vaccine hesitancy, but it's also this idea of harm reduction. And I had an experience where a close family member was saying things that were overtly racist, and they were around my table, and they were my daughter's in earshot, and I found myself in that kind of awkward situation that I think a lot of people might find themselves, whereas like, yes, I have to call this out. And yes, I also don't want to kick this person out. And so, because I feel strongly that keeping people around, in the conversation is sort of a signal of hope. And I just wonder, any of you had similar experiences, or perhaps experiences you'd like to share, or Clem, approaches to harm reduction? You talked about, a relational approach. I think that's what it's driving at here. How do we stay in relationship with people that are perhaps have views that we find really troubling to live with, but we don't want to sort of send them out into the cold of our lives as well?
Absolutely, I can speak to that. And again, for those who might not know, like the Dr. Peter Center, so we're an HIV healthcare facility designed to meet people with the greatest need. So a lot of our folks are disconnected from traditional healthcare. They might not be connected to their families, or maybe don't have much of a community at all. You can imagine during the pandemic, a lot of these other services disappeared. And so for us, it's like staying connected and staying relational and compassionate with our folks is everything, and like quite literally can be life-saving. Now, so for example, we also have a wide range of people with diverse thoughts, ideas coming to the center. And so yeah, on more than one occasion, we've had folks come in who might have been COVID deniers or anti-vaccine over the time. And so again, it's not our job, and we never want to clamp down on people's belief systems. We would never sort of shut that down and say, please, you can't be here and talk about that. No, we want to stay connected. We want to validate, respect their autonomy. Like, this is all harm reduction stuff. Like, these are principles, right? It's around providing choice, respecting autonomy, and being collaborative with the individual. And so we sort of lean into them and connect. Like, we think of harm reduction as it's an active and relational process. It's not something we step back from. And so we want to hear them, connect with them. And just over time, once we create more safety, when someone finds more safety in their lives, they become more curious and more open-minded. They also are better to self-regulate their lives too. And so we often just stay connected. Like, we have great relationships with a lot of our participants. So we kind of use those relationships as a way to sort of really acknowledge that maybe they are fearing something. There is something that they're not sure about. And if we can get them more curious, we can present more ideas and different, what we would consider more factual perspectives on the pandemic and on the virus.
It's funny you say that, because I feel like that's what you did so beautifully in your play, Yvette, right? Is sort of illuminate that, well, the relationship. And it was clear that in both cases, there was some care wanting to be taken in maintaining the relationship at the same time as having very different views on.
Well, it's all relational, isn't it? Like everything. I mean, theater is all relational. It's all about relationships. And as an Indigenous artist on this country, it's all relational. Like, Indigenous worldview is all relational. We're all connected. And then talking about where the addiction issues come from and where the fear comes from and the mistrust, all of that comes from our history together here on this land. And so there has to be some hope of redemption. There has to be some hope of a reconnection between people and the communities that they may be sort of marginal to. I mean, the thing about the play is it's very much about love and loving, and even how holding space for someone who has a place in your heart, but who also can be putting your people at risk, because of their belief system. So how do you hold them and not hold them? I mean, that's the big metaphor of the play. They air hug at the end, right?
Right.
Because they can't hug because she doesn't hug anyone who's not vaccinated. And it's that thing. It's like, everybody, you have autonomy, you have agency, but there are consequences. And we have to all live with the consequences going forward. In all of my communities, we talk a lot about abandoning people who have done bad or working with them to bring them with us. And it's way more work, but it is, if we're a community, we're a community, we're a community.
Mm-hmm. And how do, this is something I've struggled with on a personal note. So these are things that I'm voicing thoughts that were in my head that I never said out into the world. So I'll say them now at the risk of, I don't know, when situations I find myself in these situations, I find myself, one part of me wanting to say, shut up. What are you saying? You are crazy. You're, how could you think these things? You're an idiot. I thought you were a smart person, but clearly you're not a smart, all these huge judgments come. And then at the same time, I find myself, and it's particularly, within the context of this, the idea of harm reduction around misinformation, that I think about the harm isn't really coming to me. I can shield myself from that and sort of say, okay, well, that's what you think, but I'm going to go do what I'm going to do because I can have my own, whatever, I have my own mind. But I do think about my 12-year-old daughter, my 8-year-old son, and in particular, and if they are in earshot, how is that going to affect how they, and that's where the harm either continues or reduces, right? And so it's a hard challenge, right? I don't know if it's about taking the high road, but to navigate exactly what you're saying about, and not say those things, but also not allow whatever's being said to be said. It's about sort of, to my mind, I want to see, if I can't see a change in, say, their I'm not going to change their mind. I'd like them to change their behavior, I guess.
Yeah. And what it does require, I find, is something that we were losing anyway, which is communication. We have to keep having the conversations. And if your kids are in earshot of that, then you've opened up a whole other place to have a conversation with them about critical thinking, sources of knowledge, and respect for elders or family ties. I mean, it's kind of great in a way. It forces us to have more fulsome conversations with our people. It's still hard, but shame and humiliation and embarrassment, they rarely work. They don't work as a tool, as we've seen.
Right.
Yeah. It's not even about the high road. It's about what is going to work to reduce the harm in this case.
Yeah, I hear that. I see that it can be an opportunity in this case, perhaps with my son and daughter. And I can see, because we're on a video call and people are listening can't, but Clem, you're nodding a lot as that's talking here. So what are you nodding about? What's going on in your mind when she says those things?
So Wise by Yvette, shame and guilt further disconnects, right? We know this through the HIV piece. We also know this through addictions. And if someone is in a position where they're denying or angrily spouting misinformation, they're also coming from a place of fear, potentially. That's what I see it as a clinician, right? We don't want to sort of reinforce that and further disconnect them, because like we said before, this is relational, this is about connection. So we want to open up, we want to hear them. And to your point, you said, Jay, where you're saying, oh, I want to say, oh, shut up, I don't know what you're saying, you're not making any sense. What happens when we do that is we start to align with them. We move into their fear response, right? So we think of animalistic, fight, flight, and freeze. If we join that, we're actually moving away from critical thinking. We're moving away from the parts of our brain and our systems that actually are able to self-regulate, see relational pieces, connect, and understand our place in the world, right? So for me, that's how I come from as a therapist and a clinician. I love our staff because we respond, we don't react. We're able to look at situations, understand a more holistic piece of it. And it's okay, how do I come with compassion, love, and harm reduction to this situation?
Right. That sounds very wise to me, and I suppose it sounds like to me, it also starts from play. I mean, you're obviously a trained professional, but starts from a place of, being able to take a breath and not necessarily react emotionally to a situation and come instead with measure and perhaps find where the common ground is, opposed to where at least starting from there. Yeah, that's very interesting. If you each I mean, I know that I have. Have you each? I'm not asking you to share the experience, but you've seen this in your circles, your personal circles. This is not like the instinct to kind of look at this is not misguided, is it? In the sense that does appear to be kind of around, like it's in all of our lives, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And it's shocking to me. It is shocking when I find myself unexpectedly in a room at a table with a person whom I love, who's like, oh yeah, I'm not vaccinated. I'll leave if you want me to. That I'm in freeze, right? I'm like, I don't know what to do here, because it had not occurred to me. Like, my mother was a big fan of creative visualization. And here I find myself in the situation over and over again where I have not visualized how to deal with this when I'm at the table with someone who's like vaccine resistant.
I absolutely agree. It's, when it rears up in your own family, it's a shock. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think it was really that person. And then here you are. And it's funny because, yeah, at the center, in a way, it's like when you go into a workplace, you're preloaded and you have this, like, you're ready to kind of be in clinician mode. But then when you're in your family life, it's like, oh, and it's a much more visceral for me when it came within my own family. So, but then, like, hopefully, I mean, I'm not perfect, but there was, again, I had that freeze and a bit of anger, a bit of frustration, and just like, okay, how did I not see this coming? And but then how am I going to respond? I mean, it's family too. So you want to keep people close and have that opportunity to stay connected.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of speaks to, I think, the purpose in some ways of these podcasts and these plays is that it's an opportunity to take a moment to reflect and prepare for those situations that you don't expect to be coming. And in some ways, I think that's what your play, Yvette, and then the other plays in the series in different ways are asking, hopefully helping people prepare to do, which is that, we're going to find ourselves in these situations in the coming months, years, and it's maybe worthwhile to just sort of like sit in that space for a little bit. And what did you call it? Your mother's a fan of creative visualization, is that what you said? Right.
Yeah.
So that's where you come by it honestly, this whole playwriting, theater making thing. But to take a moment to do that is probably a pretty useful thing to do, because as we're recording this, we're coming up on a holiday season where a lot of us will likely be finding ourselves around tables with family or friends or people that come together for all the reasons that we do over the holidays and confronted with some of these issues. This has been a really enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you guys both coming and talking with us about this. Is there any kind of final thoughts that you'd like to add before we say farewell to our fine folks in the podcast?
I am so grateful for the opportunity, because for me, theater has to be this vital, this critical to what the world actually is. And so that you have managed to make this kind of a thing happen is just really heartening for me.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for this opportunity as well. And I think we're all looking for different and creative ways to manage and get through this pandemic. And I think using a story like this is a great idea because of the complex of all of us. It's not a one size fits all in terms of connecting with these issues. So I think this is great. And I totally appreciate the opportunity to speak here.
Thank you for saying so. And it's been one of the kind of silver linings, I suppose, in the pandemic, where these kind of unusual, before times, the idea that the Dr. Peters Center and Boca de Lupo and Yvette here would be working at a podcast and a series of plays together wouldn't likely have been something that would have come to mind. But I think it's, it does speak to the power of the work that you guys are doing at the center and the power of the theater and the arts when it comes to, transformational change, hearts and minds, as it were, that the arts do have an important part to play. And, I just like to say too, I'd like to, thank you for both coming. And Yvette, you spoke so eloquently about how quickly you were, you said yes to the project. But I'd also like to say that I'd like to thank you for how artfully you approached it, because it's not, one of the things that we hold dear is sort of the autonomy of the artist to come forward and put their ideas kind of out there in a way that they want to. And I think there's enormous power in that, so that it's not kind of prescriptive. Not that a prescription is a bad thing when it comes to medicine and whatnot, but when it comes to making art, it's one thing to have like a brief or like something you're trying to do, but then also to be able to offer something out into the world and the potency that has. So thank you both for coming with open hearts and generosity to this project. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.